Welcome to this, the third of our webinars on all things packaging. Um, these three webinars have been a sort of run into a piece of work which will be starting later this year, which is our packaging choice tool, so sustainability packaging choice tool. What does a sustainable choice look like in packaging? To which the answer is there won't be a single choice. It will depend on lots of different factors. And what we've been trying to do with these workshops is to start to explore what some of those are. And obviously, this is very much in my mind at the moment. I'm having just returned from a fascinating visit yesterday to the OI bottle plant in Asti, where we're working, which was part of our sparkling bottle weight work. And it's been great working with all of our bottle maker partners. So Madeleine is here from EdCirc as well. We've also been working with Veralia. So as with all these things, as we always say, we don't know anything. We rely on the people, the good folk on this call, who do know stuff, that we can pull together their expertise and provide sharing of that knowledge and pull together collaborative ways forward. So today's session is looking at packaging perception and the path to purchase. Very nicely alliterative. And again, we're delighted to have an excellent panel. We've got Barry Dick from Waitrose, Casey Augieri from Whole Foods Market, Gary Pickering from Brock University, and Madeleine and Maria from ENSERC. So what's today about? The two workshops we've done so far have very much looked at packaging from a practical perspective. The first one looked at carbon and the implication that carbon has for the choices that people make around packaging. However, the second shifted focus and says, well, carbon's not the only game in town from a sustainability perspective. Yes, carbon is a factor, but so are other issues like landfill and like recycling and plastics pollution. So how do all those factors you need to go into the mix in terms of taking a choice on packaging? What we're going to look at this session is what one I suppose might call the softer issues around packaging choices. So first of all, from a purpose perspective, what choices might we make? It's not about shifting everything. It's not everything goes from glass to something else, but it's what might a more nuanced set of choices look like, horses for courses. And it'll be interesting to hear from Barry and Casey about what this looks like. And what do consumers actually want? What do they actually think? And one of the sort of interesting lessons, I think, from the still bottle weight research we did a couple of years ago is that there's a lot more that we think we know about consumer perception than we actually do know about consumer perception. There's quite a lot of tropes that are believed within the industry, which don't necessarily pass muster when one is actually looking at what the data tells us we know about consumers. So we're going to look at that as well. But then finally, how does collaboration work? How do different packaging choices sit next to each other? How do the organizations that are using different packaging choices work together? How do the manufacturers work together? So the broad structure today is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to say some introductory remarks about their organization and the snapshot of what they're doing in this space. So each of them to speak for sort of 5 or 6 minutes. And then we'll go to a sort of panel discussion on various of the issues that have arisen. But then later on, we want to come to Q&A with the audience, with you, the audience. And so please do put your questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll come to those later in the meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to come to the panelists, and as is my usual way, I'm going to go around as people sit on my screen. So Madalena, that means we come to you first.
Thanks, Peter, for inviting me to join the panel. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Madalena. I'm the neurologist for UNSERC. UNSERC is part of Vidrala Group, which most of the people in the industry knows as glass manufacturers. Yet UNSERC offers a 360 approach within the packaging services. We not only make the bottle, we fill it, and we help our partners or our customer base to also distribute it. Been in the industry for a while. I think it's heading to 20 years. So I got to work wine, spirits, RTD. So brought me a wide knowledge of how the categories have been behaving across the years. So it's a privilege to sit in UNSERC and see how the agenda shifts when it comes to consumer experience. Remember back in the day that we were all still trying to figure out what consumers wanted. I remember how we're going to get wine into the glass, how we're breaking up wine glass. But it's honorable that finally sustainability and other concerns are shifting the agenda and leading the conversations. So we have quite an ambitious sustainable program that we obviously share and collaboratively work with our customers. For us, sustainability is key, and we've been rising to the challenge. Like everybody's been in the industry, from the vineyard to the shelf, how can we deliver sustainable products? For us, the impact has been felt what is tangible, which is weight. So we've been on the race fighting scrutiny against heavy glass, and we've been delivering. It's good to see that across all categories, wine is indeed the one that dropped the most in terms of percentage on its weight. Certain models of bottle goes way above 20%, how we reduced, and we are now successfully running in our lines across both sides 300 grams. Other than the sustainable program, well, no, we don't dwell on carbon because part of the conversation goes beyond those metrics. What we see though, which I think is relevant for this panel, neither the consumers or our customers are moving away from glass. And that probably comes to trust and value, which is where we see as the two pointers historically and strategically where wine sits. It's how we can trust the product and the materials where the wine is inserted, and how those materials and packaging contributes to value and to the narratives that elevate the experience, which is drinking wine. Wine is an emotional experience. It is known that emotions are the trigger and leads to the consumers to purchase wine. But we don't see neither our customers or the brands wanting to move away from glass. I think what we want across all formats is to deliver sustainable packaging. What at UNSERC obviously we promote and believe is that glass, it's not the the villain in this picture, is quite actually the hero. We've been working quite hard to innovate and to maintain what we see as a valuable format that contributes to the experience.
Marlena, thanks very much indeed. And just one thing to insert there, we did a bit of number crunching earlier in the week. You mentioned weight, and as you all know, the bottle weight accord in its first year meant that 114,000 tons of carbon didn't get emitted. And if you put that at EPR rates in the UK, extended producer responsibility rates, so were all that glass sold in the UK, those involved in the bottle weight accord would have saved themselves more than £27 million. So there's quite interesting data there. So right, Madalena, thanks very much. Now moving over again in my let's work across the screen. Casey, over to you. Let's go over the pond.
Hello, everyone. My name is Casey Augier. I'm representing Whole Foods Market today. We are a natural and organic grocer based in the US, but we also have stores in Canada and the UK. And we are expected to be a leader in sustainability in every facet of our business. We have research that shows that 48% of our customers hold the food manufacturers responsible for creating environmentally friendly packaging, however that shakes out. And we have received feedback from our personal customers that while we do sell the highest quality natural and organic and sustainable products, when you walk into our store, it's a sea of plastic. And it's a huge disconnect for us. So starting this year, Whole Foods we're actually putting our money where our products are. And we hired an executive leader of quality standards focused solely on packaging. And she started in February. Her name is Sandra. I got to meet with her this week to discuss what we're reviewing today. And she actually is kicking off her work to look at Whole Foods Market as a whole. All of our packaging of our exclusive brands are our private label products. Up until now, it's been a very piecemeal kind of each department on their own, seafood doing seafood's thing, meat doing meat's thing, produce doing produce. And we haven't really been able to leverage any kind of information or any sort of feedback on our packaging. So that is what she is spearheading, and we're looking into everything. Like, where can we? She gave an example of like cereal boxes. We have so many different sizes. So maybe is that an opportunity where we maybe down skew on packaging in cereal and maybe make that investment into something that is a little trickier, like seafood. So up, like, yeah, again, that work is just starting, but it's going to be looking at 4 areas of sustainability in packaging. So like reducing single-use plastics, improving the source material, so using a fiber instead of a fossil fuel, improving divertibility, so recyclable, reusable, compostable, and then also eliminating chemicals of concern like PFAS and EPs. Yeah, so we're kind of overall, Whole Foods is really taking a look at this to like improve our packaging product mix and make the right investments where we can.
Great, thanks for that, Casey. And I think that's what you raised is actually quite an interesting point, that until fairly recently, people didn't really think about packaging. I mean, I've certainly found this with the bottle weight
Yes.
research that we've done. It's just a thing, and no one thinks, well, what is the weight? What are the implications of it? What's the technology involved in it? And I see we've got quite a lot of sort of packaging technology people on the call today. And I think the very fact that it's choosing people to focus on it, and it may very well be that that process there will be significant cost savings which derive just from bringing together what's going on. So I think it's really interesting that quite a lot of the retail members we deal with are making the same commentary. So really fascinating. Thank you very much. Now I'm now going to work geographically north and east a bit to Canada, to Gary Pickering. So Gary, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Peter. I completed my PhD in wine science about 150 years ago at Lincoln University in New Zealand. And for the last 25 years or so, I've been a professor of enology at Brock University, which is in the Niagara region of Canada. Much of our research has been around wine flavor and wine chemistry, but the last few years, we've taken a bit of a leap across to the dark side of social sciences and marketing, and we've been looking at consumer perceptions around sustainable wine, and also looking at how we can maximize the value for wine growers who are engaged in sustainable practices. Most of our work has been focused on the Canadian market, and I think it's probably important to stress that when we later chat about some of these issues, because it may not, our findings, our perspective may not translate well to other markets, but nonetheless, with the Canadian market, there's probably a couple of comments I'd make from the start. The first is that one of the reoccurring themes that we've seen when we talk with consumers around sustainability is, no matter what the feature of sustainability is, so for instance, greener packaging, the consumers want to know that the quality of the product has not been compromised. That's a reoccurring theme no matter what wine style we're talking about. Ideally, it's been increased, but they need to be assured that that this new packaging or this new initiative in the vineyard or winery that's reducing emissions and so on has not compromised quality. I think one of the perhaps surprising findings is it doesn't matter about consumer segment in terms of its quality perception. Even those folks that are incredibly cost sensitive and they buy solely on cost, even they are reflecting that they need to know that the quality hasn't been compromised. So, so whatever we're doing on the technology front, I think the packaging needs to address that potential, that real consumer concern, either directly in terms of the functionality of the product, or indirectly through our communications and marketing around these technologies. Maybe the other starting point or big picture comment I'd have, again, for the Canadian market, they're ignorant. So the level of knowledge around sustainable wine in general is very low. Again, it doesn't matter what components of sustainable wine we're talking about, including packaging. the question of glass versus all the other alternatives. There's a low level of understanding in our market around what the elements of a sustainable wine are, and even awareness that sustainability is an issue in our industry, and that can inform our purchase decisions. So again, whatever we're doing on the technology front, there is this knowledge deficit that we as a concerted industry need to be able to address, to be able to sell our greener wines, but secondly to be able to extract the value from the consumer, perhaps with higher price points and so on. There needs to be concerted education around these issues. So maybe I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. And yes, I mean, that consumer education piece is obviously something that we as SWR will not get directly involved in, because we're B2B, not B2C. But I think having those messages is really important. I mean, I was struck by a conversation I had a while back with SAQ, which is the Quebecois monopoly. And they, as you probably know, introduced a 420 gram still weight requirement 2 or 3 years ago. And they were saying that by educating consumers about the implications of heavier glass, they were telling consumers something that they didn't know, and consumers were coming back and then saying, why are these bottles so heavy? So I think the points you make are extremely valid. So thank you, Gary. And then coming back over the pond, over to Barry.
Good morning, Peter. Wasn't sure when you were going to get to me, but all good. Yeah, look, my name's Barry Dick. I have been in the wine industry for 25 years, a bit of a combination between winemaking and wine industry work, and a chunk of time in UK grocery retail. Obviously in the wine teams there. I'm what's called a partner at Waitrose, which is really a premium end retailer in the UK. We've got about 6% of the grocery market, and we over-index, as we call it in retail speak, which means we do better on wine than other categories. So we're on about 8% of the market for wine. We work under a partnership model. I don't know if you get time, have a look at the origins of the Waitrose business, but it was started by a philanthropist with a real conscious ideals around society and community, people and the planet. So that's kind of in our DNA, and I guess that's all reflected in our business and the way we operate, and that's again reflected in our sustainability strategy, which covers all the big planks that Peter touched on at the beginning. So it's all the usual stuff like social, animal welfare, impact to climate, biodiversity, materials, health, well-being, and resilience in supply chains is kind of the big broad planks. And then my job really in the wine category is to figure out how do we translate those ambitions and those big chunks of sustainability into the wine category and do better. And I think Peter's question about what do consumers want, and I think quite simply they want a great wine experience. And I'm sure we'll kind of widen out the conversation what that means for packaging and the different options we've got. And what we're doing in the space, we're doing quite a bit, looking especially at the materials that we use. And Peter knows that we've done a lot of work with lightweight of glass, and really looking at our options for materials and trying to figure out which ones holistically offer a better solution from a quality and a cost point of view, and also from a sustainability point of view, and also that emotional response I think that Madalena and Casey talked about. So that's what we're trying to do, and this is all wrapped up in this conversation really, and especially some of these softer edges around how does the consumer feel about the different options that we're presenting. So look, that's what I want to get to is I guess just understanding that much better, and I think that's why our role here is to figure out a better understanding of the best solutions on this. I'll leave it there, Peter. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for us, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the over your larger hit on in the wine category comes from some excellent choices, and also the 25% off 6 or more wines, which always goes a long way to helping drive. But so thanks for that. And I'd like to start actually with this question about how we've seemed to be seeing more of a, for want of a better term, a playing around with different packaging types. That I think it's unlikely that glass is going to cease to be the main format. But it's interesting in some of the research we've done to see things like the increased use of cans. Small serve, so people can just have a single drink, or in a situation like a concert or something, like even Wimbledon, where being able to have a single serve is a valid approach. Seeing more in terms of plastic bottles. Last year, Wine Society sold their white Burgundy as in a 2.25 bag-in box, fits in the milk shelf in the fridge. So it's interesting to see how that's coming forward, and obviously how the acceptability of those things is going to vary market by market. So at this point, I'd like to sort of, Casey, come back to you and to say, you as an organisation, I know have done a lot of work on lightweighting of wine bottles. You've done a lot of work in sort of experimenting with different formats. And probably what might be seen as quite a challenging market for doing things differently. So it'd be interesting to have your commentary about what's getting traction, what's not getting traction. If you are changing formats for things, what kind of rolling the pitch do you need to do to be able to sort of get those things to run? So Casey, over to you.
So yeah, we are having great success with our lightweight glass. Pretty much under the $39 price point so far. Huge success. It feels like, sneaking in some vegetables with like your kids' dinner. She's like, oh, this is good for everything and everybody. Just it's great all around. But as far as expanding outside of glass, we did run a frugal bottle last summer, a kind of seasonal in and out with Bonnie Doon, and the packaging was awesome. Really cool graphics. The wine inside of it was great, and it was definitely seen like as a kind of like a wine novelty. Like it made a splash for us, but it doesn't. We don't have any other examples to kind of track it or get any sort of reliable feedback on. Cans are doing well. They definitely have, come into themselves, but they are just hitting a ceiling. Like it's like the single use, and that's it. Like people are not using them for anything outside of or anything elevated. Like it's just like, oh, we're going to the beach, we're going to the pool, we can't have glass there. Oh, we'll just get a can. That's perfect. So it just kind of is like hitting this, the ceiling of this kind of as far as it's going to go. And anything further than that, it's just kind of, we know that education, as Gary was saying, it plays a huge role. And we know that like our millennials and Gen Z are much more accepting to try something new, but we also need to make the case for them to spend a little bit more potentially on this kind of packaging. And yet also the assurance that it's not going to affect the quality of the product in the bag or bottle.
Thanks for that. And Barry, I'm going to ask you the same question. I mean, obviously, as a Waitrose shopper, I've seen there's quite a lot of interesting different formats there, and you sit them alongside, as it were, the regular formats in the sense that you're still taking a choice about a wine, but it's which format do you want it in? What are you finding is getting traction and what isn't? How's the UK market differ from the US in that regard?
Sorry, Peter, that was a question to me. What are we? I think to Casey's point, we've the transition. As you know, we moved all of our small glass bottles to cans, just coming up on a year and a half ago now, and for us, that's been a great bit of work. And to Casey's point, a lot of that's been driven by the consumer occasion. Cans are a well accepted format in soft drinks and other categories in a grocery retailer. So we find some really good acceptance actually for wine in cans. And it's interesting. We kind of thought it was all the younger consumers, but actually it's quite a few of the older consumers are quite happy to buy wine in can as well, which has been great. So we've seen a sales uplift, and I think some of that has been driven by, as I say, the acceptance of the format. On shelf, it looks really good because of the cans. They're a nice uniform shape and they sit on the shelf. All these boring things that retailers, have to worry about and there's a thing called tip angles. How stable something is on a shelf, which can affect some of the formats that we've looked at that have been innovative, but they just they can't perform when it comes to sitting on a shelf. So cans look good on shelf. They're easy to merchandise. The design and branding is really strong. So we had a couple of really quite hesitant brands about moving into cans, and once they made the move, they've all been very happy, and the brands look great. So the cans has definitely worked really well. Lightweight in glass also, we've been on the move for the last 2 years, and we certainly haven't had much feedback. So I think again, there's been acceptance. If as we've talked about, if that's done well, it's really worked. Bag and box is certainly, I think, an area where again, it's an accepted format. I think we've got more to do, and it's quite often sometimes you get attracted by the shiny new things, and you forget about the potential in existing technology, really. And bag and box is a well accepted format. So I think we've got more to do on all of that stuff. I'm certainly, and there was a question in the thing. My job, I say, is to really keep close to any of the innovations that are coming through, and constantly be making assessments of whether we feel it's right for the Waitrose customer or not. And there's certainly been some innovations that we've looked at. For example, PET flat bottles that fall over. We can't do that just from a merchandising point of view. Frugal pack, I think, is okay. We've had some good debates looking at that, and it really is just a bottle-shaped bag and box, and hasn't offered that real solution for the standard format of 75cl that I think we are looking for in terms of the materials and the performance, and that the consumer experience and acceptance. But I do think there's some really quite exciting lighter weight options for the 75cl standard size coming through, either in aluminium or, as there was a question, Peter, about paper. And look, paper, I think, has got really good potential, and especially some of the new tech using paper. And it's all about, and this is where it gets tricky, because the US and other markets and their recycling infrastructure is very different to the UK. So what could work in the UK market might not be quite so effective from a holistic point of view in another place. So we've got to consider the after use or kind of post consumer recycling of the materials. But so I think I've given you a fairly good synopsis of what I think is working well and where there's potential. But that's kind of how we see it at the minute. But and then we'll probably go on to talk about this further. But it's certainly not the case where there's going to be a single bullet that's going to replace glass. I think glass has got its place. Bag and box has its place. Cans have got their place. And I think we will see some more that same kind of convenience, occasional use around the standard size that we will also, bring into our main estate, which will replace glass to some extent. But I certainly see glass having a place ongoing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Barry. There's some interesting stuff there. I mean, I think you talk about lightweight bottles. I mean, it's been interesting. Quite a lot of the growers that we talk to have been saying that they've been lightweighting bottles over the years, and no one's really noticed. So it does show that that's possible. And I think you're absolutely right that there's not going to be a single right answer. The work we've done so far on other formats is that it is going to be horses for courses. There are going to be different things work for different markets and different circumstances. And I think it's sort of seeing there being a bit more of a plurality, I think, is interesting. But it's not, we've done everything in glass, now we're going to do everything in something else. It's going to be, as you say, a mixed picture. I'm going to come to you next in terms of what I mean. You mentioned in your introductory remarks that there's rather more that we don't know about some of these issues than we do know. What are you seeing from the kind of research perspective about where we're going on moving towards a bit more of a plethora of packaging types?
Sorry, Peter, that was directed at me.
Yeah, please, Gary.
I think we run the risk of crowding the marketplace and confusing the consumers. And I think consumers, particularly Gen Y and Gen Z, who we very much need to be concerned about in terms of winning them over to wine as the alcohol product of choice. They're quite sensitive to greenwashing, and I think there's some confusion around the the plethora of new products or new packaging that's out there and what it all signifies. I know I'm an educator and therefore biased, but I keep coming back to the role of education, be it sales folks, be it the retailers, be it the wine media, be it social influencers. I think a concerted effort to not just educate consumers about the particular environmental benefits or social sustainability benefits of a particular package, but to me, green packaging in wine is actually an opportunity for moving Gen Y and Gen Z into wine as their product of choice. Now, this is the generation that I know we all know this, but it doesn't matter what consumer good you're looking at, whether or not it's fashion industry, whether or not it's transport, whatever. Sustainability is a huge cue in terms of their product choice. We know that from a lot of research. So to me, these two younger generations are already primed to be what's the right word, to respond to all the wonderful green initiatives within our industry, and if we can have a concerted effort to move them towards wine as the most natural, most environmentally sustainable, most morally and socially responsible form of alcohol, then packaging becomes just one of those levers, and actually a good lever to try and move them in that direction, because it's the most visual element of a wine. So I'm not sure what my point really is, Peter, other than to say I think just some general clarity and education around what are the sustainability issues in the booze industry in general, and promoting all the wonderful stuff we're doing, including packaging, to try and further these goals. To me, it feels very bitsy in the marketplace at the moment, and we're not necessarily as coordinated as we could be in promoting these messages. And I think that's part of the SWR's mandate and part of the potential there. So it's a huge potential. I just would like to see more coordination from all of us in promoting wine as a sustainable choice in these generations, and packaging can be a huge part of that message.
Thanks, Gary. And yes, I certainly think we certainly see our role as being to provide that sort of clarity. I mean, the challenge with a lot of, not just packaging, but a lot to do with sustainability, is that there's not necessarily a single level playing field of evidence that everyone proceeds from, which means that which obviously sometimes means that greenwashing becomes a problem. If we can develop an evidence base that says, here are the relative pros and cons of different packaging types, then everyone at least is proceeding from that same evidence base. And then there is a consistency in that messaging. Madeleine, I'm going to come to you next, because obviously you're sitting there working with a glass maker. So in a sense, you're the hegemon. You're the part of the packaging world which is at the center of almost everything that goes on at the moment. I mean, it's 90-odd% of all wine in the world is sold in glass bottles. What are you seeing from your side in terms of perhaps the conversations you're having with some of your customers, in terms of where the sorts of discussions we've just been having is moving your conversations and your actions, and how you're proceeding as a bottle maker?
Conversations are shifting and expanding beyond carbon, which obviously we think that's positive. Carbon is the main metric, but when it comes to sustainability, we're finding elevating it to value and health. And health is a big theme, and it's something that we're monitoring closely. I get some cynicism when people tell me that is an easy win, but I think it's an important win, if not the win. Health has been a theme present in wine since ever. If you go to the Mediterranean diet, is the flagship. Several studies trying to prove how wine in moderation actually helps. We can question those, but packaging now is part of that conversation when it comes to wine, and the feel. Even within our partners and across our global customer base, this is a concern, and we don't want to see the category, going against the current. And I think we heard Casey saying here that plastic is a concern, and is a big concern across all the consumer and all the food chain. And it's we want to assure that in order to preserve diversity of the experience on shelf, we don't compromise within the packaging choices to the point that we are compromising, that experience. And back to the feel, it is an emotional experience, but it's a positive one, it's an aspirational one, it's a romantic one. The last thing that we need is, on the background of that inconscient or conscious act of purchasing wine, that we're going to link it to fear or mistrust or anything else. So I agree with Gary that education is key, but it's important that we bring a balancing act to what are those priorities holistically when it comes to sustainability. And for us in glass, yes, that is part of the discussion. We have data. Data is out there. We all discuss it when it comes to, because we don't sell glass just for wine. Is a conversation across all categories. So it's how we deliver, not just fit for purpose, but we continue feeding and delivering beyond that purpose of just moving liquid. We like to believe, and we know that is the case, that packaging is the first thing that we come across before opening that container. In the case of a bottle, I work as a winemaker for so long, but I quite enjoy walking into a wine shop, keep that element anonymous, and enjoy the experience, just browsing to the bottles, still benefit from that emotional act, which is choosing and drinking wine and sharing that experience. So I guess that's what I would like to see being more discussed and conscious across the industry.
Thanks, Marlena. And yes, the association with wine and health. I mean, if you go back to the Iliad, that many of the heroes would drink wine before they went into battle. So take that as you will. I'd like to move forward to the sort of this, the issues being raised already. That's what is the consumer perception of some of this sort of stuff. One of the issues that we found, or the conclusions we reached in the still wine bottle report a couple of years ago, is that there tends to be a habit of people in the industry to talk about the consumer as if there is a single uniform consumer the world over. And that's not the case. The consumers and what causes them to buy different things vary market by market within market. And that nuancing is incredibly important. And so I'd like to, start off with Casey and Barry, because obviously you've got quite different markets, both geographically and probably in terms of demographics. It'd be interested to pick up on some of the comments you've already started to sort of move into. What do you see are the different perceptions around packaging formats? What has allowed you within that retail space to get shifts, to get consumers to say, okay, yeah, we'll go for that. So Casey, I'll start with you, and then come back, Barry, to you afterwards.
So we have some just older shoppers, so maybe your Gen X, your boomers, they're kind of more interested in packaging innovations that are functional. So like, is this resealable? Is it recyclable? And then we have our younger shoppers, or Gen Z and millennials, who are much more interested, maybe who kind of take that for granted, and then also want more innovation and convenience, whether it is like, space saving, eco-friendly, however. But as we're trying to focus on getting more of these younger generations into our store and to buy wine, we're definitely making the case to be transparent on why we are making the choices we're making and how it affects them and their future and the overall health of our planet. We do have to take in, like as Barry said earlier, not only are our recycling infrastructures very different from each other, in the States, also region to region, it is also different. So as a retailer that is, in every state in the United States, it's very challenging for us to make one choice. So I'm very happy that we're talking about multiple options, because I was a Whole Foods Market store manager in Miami, and when I was there, we actually stopped recycling glass because the facility that was down there at the time, just stopped functioning because they couldn't do it anymore. So then all the glass just went into the landfill. So while we're talking about these things, finding like the reasons to get behind these, it's much larger than just what we're doing in our stores. Like, does each region in the United States have the ability to do it, and how can we get that message out to everybody?
Thanks, Casey. And yes, and I was looking at some statistics the other day about relative recycling rates in the US for glass. And it's something, the two numbers that struck me was you've got sort of California and Oregon are sort of the 70% recycling, whereas, Ohio, it's 8%. So it's really very marked. And obviously that goes for other packaging types as well. So now coming to you, Barry, because, obviously you're dealing with a very different market. As you say, you've been successful in introducing some new packaging types in certain spaces. What's that told you about the consumer you deal with? What's had to be done to help make that migration work?
Again, it's super interesting, even in two markets that are many miles apart. I think some of the things that Casey said about why her consumers have been quite happy to buy bag and box or cans, those are equally valid in the UK. So that the consumers are really driving some of that, and the demand has to be there. I've definitely heard some really good insights from some of the big corporates around good sustainability can't mean a denigration to to that wine experience that I talked about at the top. It's got to be an enhancement to that experience, and whether it's adding convenience or lightweight or some of the practical stuff that Casey talked about, I think that's where we see we can get some good go forward. Is we've got to bring all of these things together, but fundamentally the consumer's got to be on board with with whatever product that you're putting in front of them. And look, the sustainability credentials are a consideration, and all those other kind of practical stuff about recycling, that's all part and parcel. But if we're not presenting something that looks like it's exciting, interesting, and adding something to that great kind of wine or drinking experience, then it's really, really difficult. So look, that's what I'm really conscious of, that when we do these things, and I think if you look at some of the packaging innovations that have worked, so for example, screw cap back in the day, that was a very clear fundamental message that with some confidence, the market moved in a meaningful manner. And that's, I think that's why we did well with the small glass move. We just moved everything in one go. So over a very short period of time, you walked into Waitrose store and all the glass bottles, the smalls were gone and they were replaced with cans. And I think if I was a Waitrose shopper, that shows a little bit of confidence from us as a retailer that we've kind of looked at it, done the research, done the assessments, and we've come together on a solution or a proposition that we feel good about. So whenever we do these things, and Gary mentioned about education, look, I appreciate we've definitely got a role to play as a retailer on education and explaining these concepts. But when our customers are walking around the shop, they're really time poor. We've, essentially as retailers, we have to focus on the fundamentals, which is communicating what price is this, what size is it, and all the basics about making a purchasing and a buying decision. So look, the education piece is really tough, and we kind of rely on some of the other things to get that done. As I say, not denying that we've got a role to play, but it is tough to get that share of voice, to educate customers on this stuff. But I think sustainability, fundamentally, we're going to have to explain some of those principles, whether it's on your washing powder about, lighter weight, recycling, reusing, all that stuff. I think those fundamentals of sustainability we will start to communicate, and as I say, it will be done in a meaningful way during your shopping experience. You'll start to learn and understand the fundamentals of sustainability and how you can help if you're a ethically minded kind of concerned customer.
Thanks, Barry. And yes, I think that time poor issue is really important. I think one of the things we'd like to be able to get to is, retailers being able to say all those bottles on that shelf over there are compliant with the bottle weight accord, therefore lighter, therefore less carbon, therefore you can pick one of those up and feel good about yourself. Gary, coming to you, we've heard from two specific markets. Obviously, you've looked at the complexity of consumer purchasing queues across many markets. One of the things that struck me both from the conversations we've had before and also from a recent paper you wrote is that actually, in terms of the queues, packaging is relatively low down in terms of the ones where there's a sort of pre sense of what we're going to buy. So in a sense, one could almost argue that it's up to us to be able to write what consumers should be thinking and how they can packaging can be started to use as part of a much more sensible debate around sustainability. So kind of over to you for what you think we could and should be doing about consumer perception in relation to different packaging types.
Oh, goodness me. You know what? How about I answer that by not answering that and just respond to Barry's comment, and it may help with your question, Peter. But it's more of a question for Barry and others, of course. I absolutely understand the reality of the retail space and time constraints and everything else, and education, to that extent, is a luxury for sales folks to be engaging. And so my question's around labels. I mean, labels are part of packaging, and I'm just really depending upon the consumer segment and the degree of involvement of the consumers with wine, labels can be very important. Obviously, both front and back labels. But in terms of back label information, then here's a question for you all: to what extent can labels be an educator for us in terms of promoting specific sustainability features of a given wine? I understand all the constraints in terms of space available and limited concepts that you can convey in a label, but are labels practically part of the solution in terms of educating the consumers, about how wonderful and sustainable wine is in general, but secondly, about the specific sustainability benefits of whatever feature it is of your wine that you want to promote?
Barry,
and obviously something has to give. Something has to give because there's only limited space on a label. But I'm really curious to know your perspectives around. I mean, we've done experiments in which you manipulate wine label information, so I can answer part of that question myself. But that's within an experimental paradigm. Actually, in a retail space, can labels be part of this education solution? Is my question.
A good question. I think you alluded to it. The mandatories and all the legal stuff that we got to get on there is getting more and more onerous. So I would say that is getting harder and harder. Whether some tech with QR codes or embedded codes can help alleviate and regain some of that space for storytelling about where the wine's from, what it tastes like, and what it goes well with. That's another question. So we might see a little bit of an interplay between hopefully some of the mandatories and the boring stuff, be able to come off the label, and it might create a bit of space. But there is some real tension there, and certainly, some of the governments in different regions. I'm sure the US is the same with the what do you call it, the Surgeon General's warning, and Ireland's just done something. They've got something similar, but as I say, look, those mandatories look pretty onerous. So it is tough. I think we're losing space rather than gaining space to tell those stories about all the good stuff about what the wine tastes like and sustainability. So I think the label will play less of a role. So it's about how we can tell that story and educate outside of the label. As I say, it's just getting very crowded, would be my view at the minute.
Casey, you're nodding along there. So What's your take?
Oh, yes, I completely agree. We're losing space to actually talk about what is in the bottle and what it tastes like, and the beautiful, all of that great information. We're losing it. I did a little bit of. We kind of kicked off some of our sustainable wine work 2 years ago, and just kind of trying to see if Whole Foods could put some sort of badge or some sort of icon on a shelf tag to say this wine is sustainable. And then that led us down this road of how many different kinds of sustainable certifications there are in the United States. It is, it's unbelievable. So it's like, how do we, that's very cool. Your winery is LEED certified. We love that. How does that compare to something that is salmon safe or bee safe? Like, there's so many different aspects to sustainability that getting these different certifications or putting something on a label, it's getting to a point where it's getting so minute and so small that I feel like the message is getting lost. So it's we're trying to tell a whole story on like 2 inches of space, and we are also we're asking all of our private label wines to put ingredients and serving facts on the label. Right now, that's not table stakes in the United States right now, as it is in Europe, but like that's also taken up a lot of space on our label because we think people should know what they're drinking. Why don't you know what the ingredients are in this wine? Like, why is that acceptable? And it shouldn't be. So we are kind of putting our money on that at the moment, but also so the space on a label is getting tinier and tinier.
That's interesting, and
it's a really winding answer, but
it's interesting, isn't it? Because we in the sustainability world often tend to think that that's the only priority, but the reality is that it's one of many priorities that businesses need to meet, and it's a question of how that blends together. We hope that some of our work, for example, around the benchmarking of different standards, will make things more straightforward. That it will be possible to say, this is how these standards compare. These ones are credible. These aren't. So actually, it doesn't matter whether it says Napa Green or whether it says Sustainable Wines California or Long Island Sustainable Wine. It'll be they either meet the grade or they don't. And again, that hopefully will streamline that sort of communication to the consumer. I want to just muddle in. I'm going to put a sort of slightly different question to you from the Q&A. Again, sticking with the consumer, but Jonathan Holmes has asked: do alternatives to glass prompt experimenting in pack size? Barry's talked about the 750 ml. That's been the kind of industry norm for forever, not forever, but for a long time. Are you seeing questions about, well, do we do different size bottles? 75 cl, kind of why?
Yeah, we do have the different sizes of bottles, even magnums to the 200s. I think 750 is definitely the format that is present on shelf and pretty much everybody's table or bar. I don't think the quest is so much for size. I think if you want to draw the comparison with cans in terms of convenience, it's known that cans might suit certain aspects, but the size that we still see in demand, and we have 35 live projects to design a completely new. It's the 750. And I think there's a few reasons for that. As much as we promote moderation, there's ways to preserve a bottle that is open. It is still a shared experience, etc., etc. So it's still the preferred format. Then we don't see demand to go beyond, in terms of glass, the sizes that are already currently in the market. Not that it justifies a complete product design, it's also the suitability to the filling lines, but we do not see that demand. The 200 ml bottle, it's out there, it's still present. It might have alternatives, but it is still present.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're drawing towards the end of our hour, but I'd like to just, in this last 5 minutes, riff back to a point that Gary, you made around it's all a bit bitsy. You've each got a minute. What do you think should be done? What could SWR most usefully do in making it less bitsy? Gary, as it was your expression, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I think I suggest, in terms of resources, limited resources, and what we're trying to achieve, educate the educators. Maybe that's the best use, and potentially of some of the wonderful benchmarking and other documents and exercises that SWR has and is producing. Get these documents, get these stories into the educators so they can do the work for us. So, that's obviously the wine media, and some of the wine media are already, on board in terms of when they do wine reviews. They're also talking about the weight of the bottles that they reviewed and so on. Those things help. The social influencers, get customed packages to these educators and influencers so they can do the work for us, part of the work for us in terms of promoting all the wonderful green stuff that we're doing.
Thanks, Gary. Going to go from Gary to Barry.
Look, I think it's a really good point from Gary. Funny, I've just been talking this week internally at Waitrose about sustainability as a skill set is kind of guarded and kept by a few individuals, often in big companies, and certainly some of the some of the big FMCG companies I'm speaking to. That sustainability is a skill set that sits apart, and it's about bringing that skill set into industries from everyone involved in the key decision making. It's not just the sustainability person who sits in a team down the end of the corridor. So I've been talking this week about how do we bring that skill set into the decision making at all points, and so that would apply absolutely to the wine industry. How do we talk to WSET about sustainability being part and parcel of any wine conversation? I think we've got to depart from just talking about vineyards and chateaus, and I think, as I say, the markets are interested in some of this other stuff, and I think people who are very wine engaged and as professionals, if I could wave a magic wand, we would all carry around some good knowledge on sustainability and how it impacts the wine industry. I've always said the wine industry's got some of the best, the best examples of sustainability. I think we've got it all going on. Agriculture, social, long, complicated supply chains. So, look, I'd love to see that all going in. I think the other point I would make, and we've started it, Peter, is I think there are retailers with similar sustainable ambitions globally. And look, and I've talked about the complication. I work for a grocery retailer. BWS, Beers, Wines and Spirits, is a part of our business, but we are a grocery retailer. And there are a lot of other grocery retailers globally who also sell wine. So look, I think probably the commercial opportunity is if retailers with that similar sustainable agenda. If I look at Whole Foods as Casey's sustainable strategy, it'd be pretty similar to ours. So the things that are important to me are going to be important to those other retailers. And I think if we are going to influence the supply or global, because we're all dipping into the same global supply base. So if we are going to influence that, I think the quicker that we can get together and get alignment on, what we're going to push on priorities, as well as how we communicate and educate, whether it's on pack or off pack, and we all start to sing off the same hymn sheet. If I could wave a magic wand, that's what we get you to do, Peter. No pressure. But that would be great.
That's what we're trying to do with our retailer group. I mean, it sometimes is a little bit like herding cats, but that's definitely the ambition. Because, as you say, the agendas are broadly the same, and it makes sense to collaborate on that. Casey, briefly to you.
I have to agree with everything that Barry said. It's just maybe finding the through line for all of us, and then increasing education and transparency on it, whether it is improving divertibility or just maybe switching the source material, whatever it is that can help the most of us, like the largest footprint, mixed with transparency and education, that would be tops.
Cool. Thank you, Casey. And Madalena, lastly but no means leastly, to you briefly, how do you stop it being less bitsy?
I think it's an incredibly highly regulated industry wine. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But back to the experience, I don't think the consumer wants to be necessarily educated, not the average one. He wants to be wowed. He wants that experience to be elevated and to be emotional. And I think what we need here is for the bodies as this SWR to keep working, as Barry said, with the key stakeholders. So everybody across the industry makes sustainable choices and informed choices. But when it comes to consumer, in a world of the information is available everywhere in our hands with smartphones, is it really a research study that we're going to pull from our pockets when it comes to buy wine, or is the interface, is packaging, is that emotional link that is like, I want to take this wine with me tonight for dinner?
Brilliant. Well, on the let's finish on the idea of emotion and the importance of driving that through all of this as well. Lots of interesting points around. I mean, the point Barry made about how do you make sustainability better part of a wider decision making process? How can you educate consumers who are time poor? What are the messages? Lots of interesting stuff out of today. So thank you so much to the speakers, to Casey, to Barry, to Gary, and to Madalena. And yes, watch this space. We're going to pull together the not exactly the findings, but some of the key points that have come out of these three meetings as a sort of an initial sort of short position paper around packaging choice, which we then build on later in the year. So thank you for the audience for coming along. Gary, Barry, Casey, Madalena, thanks so much for giving up an hour of your day, and goodbye everyone, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Cheers guys.